call this meeting of the Governance Committee to order. Sorry that we had to reschedule this. Just seems like calendars are complicated and it's not always easy to make it work for everyone. But I'm glad
July and August.
Yeah, July is difficult. I'm glad we're all here today. We have a short turnaround today because we only have an hour. So we're really just going to get started on the topics that are on the agenda. So I wanted to give everyone a heads up, and I will be sure to leave some time at the end of the meeting for public comment. But we have another meeting scheduled in just 10 days on July 11th. So with that, the roll call. Councilor Lombardi.
Here.
Councilor Tabor.
Here.
And I'm Councilor Cook, and I am here. The first item under our agenda is committee ordinances for review. And you will note that we have gone through the entire list of committees at this stage. And we have chosen to sunset committees that are no longer operational. So we have a list of those committees. And we are now at the stage, and that list is now complete. And we are now at the stage where we're talking about committees that either we need to make minor changes to, or committee proposals. So this is a potential committee proposal around a committee that addresses parks in the city, and we have invited two members of the staff to speak with us today, Todd Henley and Peter Britz. And they're going to kind of give us perspectives, different perspectives on a potential parks addition to committees because they have different responsibilities. So I don't know which one of you wants to start.
Why don't I start and kind of lay the groundwork, because we've had some conversations. So what we've been sort of informally thinking about and discussing kind of offline a little bit with among staff and with the chair of the committee is, are there advantages or disadvantages in adjusting, if you will, the scope of some of the current committees. And I've talked with Peter Rice, who couldn't be here today, because when you talk about something like trees and greenery, which is related, but falling under the, if you will, having something to do with parks sometimes, that committee, from the Public Works Director's perspective, is really well focused on trees, and probably sits, as it does now, as a fairly useful, very well-defined mission in terms of providing input on trees. So that's kind of his perspective from a management point of view. It has a good mission or function in terms of being that sounding board on very specifically tree-related issues. And then when we get to the Recreation Department, obviously we've had a very active and useful recreation board for many years. And the only sort of perspective to add to that is that historically the Recreation Board has been very much focused on programmatic types of elements, so more organized sports, if you will, and programs, as opposed to more passive uses of some of our parks and recreation space. And so that has just been kind of noted over time, that the piece that has to do with, trails, do we want to add trails? Do we want areas really just for more wandering around and watching the birds, if you will, or reflective spaces? We have a lot of those spaces, but we really don't have a good, venue for that public piece when there are policy decisions or suggestions of where we could get input in terms of priorities or how we might want to look at acquiring new spaces. So there's a little bit of a gap there. We have the Pierce Island Committee. Obviously, it's been very active for many years, but that's focused on just one area. And we've seen the advantages of, sort of that input over time in terms of helping to evolve what the Pierce Island area is going to look like. a lot of work's been done out there. So we probably don't need a committee that does that single area so much as maybe looking at, as we've been kind of as part of the conversation today, is would it make sense to have more like a Parks and Recreation single board so that we have one spot shopping, so to speak, for getting input on Parks and Recreation, and it has both components of those other elements of our open spaces and our recreation spaces, as well as the very robust and helpful programming elements that we've heard over time. And then, so that's in part, explains why Todd Henley is here as our great resource on that programmatic recreation piece, but obviously he is sensitive to passive recreation opportunities as well, having obviously a good holistic view of the needs of our citizens. I also brought in Peter Britz, as you know, our environmental planner, and he works with the Conservation Commission on a regular basis, and of course they have a role in identifying and protecting our conservation spaces, which sometimes have particularly passive recreation opportunities. It kind of depends on the nature of the parcel. So we thought it would be good to bring him in to help define and explain what we have, to the extent there's interest in that, and where that intersection is, and also trying not to tread on anyone's space here in terms of roles and responsibilities. So that's what you have here. Peter Rice is happy to come to a later meeting if we need it, but I think you've got a couple of elements here that you can begin to really work through this conversation about whether it makes sense or not to look at a single board for Parks and Recreation. So, okay.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman.
If you want to speak first. Then,
No,
yeah.
I was just going to see if our guests have anything that they want to say. That's all.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll wait then.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if either of you wants to.
I think Todd is willing to start. Todd, do you want to?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think from my perspective, the Recreation Board has done, a little bit of overview on some of this over the years. There's definitely some overlapping coverage of, what falls under the Rec Board, and then, like the Pierce Island Committee. We've had joint meetings together over the years in regards to recreation and different things that are on Pierce Island. And then I also just want to note that, as a staff, we've talked about this recently about trying to coordinate having, the recreation department be like where you would go to find all of the information about, parks and everything in our city. And so, right now, we've talked about putting together that sort of coordinated effort to list all the trails, all the different passive recreation sites, all the different water access locations, all of those things. So, right now, if you go to the city's website, you have to go to like 3 or 4 different places just to find all that information. So, to me, from a streamlining perspective, it makes more sense to have it all be sort of falling under the Recreation Department, and then also, the Recreation Board. We already oversee the, Fort Tree Island and the reservation process there. So I think there's a lot of, it just makes a lot of sense that this would be something that would come together so that we can sort of have a broader view of the whole recreation scheme across the city.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can give a little perspective. I guess first, in terms of the Conservation Commission, I'm staff to the Conservation Commission. Their role really is to review wetland permits, is a big part of what they do at their meetings, and then their statutory role is to oversee the conservation lands of the city. And so, to that end, they are very interested, and this is an area that could use some support, and we've been trying to work on it through the years. But just understanding those conservation lands, we put together a study called the Pula Study, which looks at all the city-owned properties that are undeveloped. So there was like 91 at the time. There's like 95 now. But looking at all those properties, trying to look at the conservation values, whether there's recreation potential, things like that, are all contained in that study. Beyond that, they haven't really gone to the next step of what other recreation opportunities the city might want to do. I don't know that that's really their role, and so that's an area that I think is maybe would be useful, that passive recreation piece. There is a conservation ordinance, so of those, this map I didn't bring on for everybody, but this shows all the conservation lands in the city. But then beyond that, there's these 92 parcels. So those properties could be added to the conservation lands, or they could have trails put on them. There's other things that could be done with them that I think a committee could help with. We do have a conservation ordinance that has 39 properties that are in conservation, and those are listed in our city ordinances. So how that gets adjusted and looked at would be another role that committee could help with. And then the Conservation Commission the open space plan identified a whole bunch of properties that could be added to that list of conservation lands. Conservation Commission's interested in trying to get a good spread throughout the city, so no one area has more than others. And they've identified 6 parcels to sort of slowly try to talk to property owners, because they have a fund, the Conservation Fund, which is the current use penalty money that goes into an account specifically for conservation lands. And if the Conservation Commission finds a property that they think is a good one to protect, then they would make a recommendation to the City Council to protect it if they got a willing seller, and the council would then decide whether they wanted to spend that money on that. So there's a process for that. But then what happens with those lands beyond that that are protected? Do we put trails on them? Do we keep them just for wildlife? They might be interested in giving some input, but they don't really have that passive recreation piece in their bailiwick. So to me, it seems like it would be helpful to have another group to talk about that piece with, that's closer to the recreation than conservation.
Thank you. Councilor Lombardi, I know you have a
Yeah,
question.
I think you all know that I was a park ranger with the National Park Service, and
I did not know
I did not
that.
know that.
I guess you didn't. But the park management goes far beyond recreation, and I have no problem with, joining forces with recreation, but I guess I would like to see some expertise in more broader park management represented on that board, if this is the case. That's my only thing there.
Councilor Tabor?
I think Peter Britz puts on the table in front of us some great opportunities. In other words, there's potential land for conservation that we haven't acted on, and there's opportunities that will come up as landowners might be persuaded to let go of land. If you look at the last 2 master plans, there's a continuous thread of public input that we want more green space as a city, and we want to create more green space. So I think I would put it this way: what's the best way that we can use a committee structure to drive towards the drive towards the outcome of more green space and more active use of the conservation land we have? For example, the whole parcel off Jones Avenue is a wonderful parcel. We have the example of McEachern Park, which was an opportunity that came up, and we seized that. There's other. We talked about paper streets that potentially we could turn into water access in the south end and other parts of Bow Street. I think there's one. So, how do we as a governance committee create some entity that's always looking for those opportunities and acting on them? That's what I'd be looking for. I was recently out in Bend, Oregon, where my daughter lives, and they've become a really nice city because they protected land all along the river for trails, for walking, for parks. And as the lumber mills died out, they turned all that into Riverside Parkland. And that's defined the city. But they had a guy who was actually recruited, Todd, you'd like this, to be the rec director because he was a great baseball coach. And he just became obsessed with parkland. And he took a map of the city and he drew circles around every place he thought there should be parks. And 20 years later, they'd done it. We don't have as many opportunities, but we should inventory the opportunities we do have and do whatever we can. So that's my thoughts on it.
I'm wondering if maybe the next step for the next committee is to look at creating a mission, because I think that's how we define or try and capture what I'm hearing from sort of everyone. So that sometimes it's helpful if we actually have the, some words in front of us that we can wordsmith. So if that would be helpful, maybe we could tee that up to develop what the mission would look like, and then tease out from there what expertise or interests we would be looking at, and build it from that point. So if that would be helpful, I'm sure I could work with Todd and Peter, and maybe bring a draft to you, Councilor Cook, and if it looks good enough, you could talk, add it to the agenda for the next committee meetings to help take us the next step. So if that's helpful, we can try and do that.
Thank you. I think that actually would be incredibly helpful. When I'm thinking about this and I'm hearing these different perspectives, clearly at the city management level, we have several people who are working on this from different angles already. So I think it would make sense to have a committee that included all these different perspectives. Maybe instead of having just a committee that's maybe it's, instead of expanding rec just to have a Parks and Rec, having maybe more like a joint committee between the Conservation Commission, between the Rec Department, and then actually looking at other expertise as well. I know that we've seen that in the past. Some of them are more successful than others. I know one of the committees that we have sunsetted was an envisioned committee between planning and zoning that was discussing changes, but that really didn't get off the ground in the way I think that it was anticipated years ago. So I think it would be really critical to have a clear mission, to have very clear instructions on kind of what kind of expertise this needed. I think Councilor Lombardi can be a great resource to us as far as what expertise is envisioned for parks, knowing how they're managed well. But I also think that it is valuable to have these perspectives, because I think about some of our conservation areas, like the Great Bog is one of the ones I always think about. We don't have really well-developed recreation opportunities there. But we could, especially in conjunction with a rail trail going in. So it's that kind of us thinking very clearly about the long-term planning around recreation, conservation, and parks management in general, and how that should be done as far as the city and expanding those green spaces. So I think in that sense it'd be extremely helpful to at least have a starting point, and it might take some time.
Yeah.
So does anyone have any other questions today?
Even inventorying what we have that tends to get overlooked. Like, don't we have some
Oh, go ahead.
water access on Sagamore Creek, I think?
Yeah, I mean, so that's what this PULA study does. It inventories what we have in terms of ownership, but in terms of access and recreation, that's a whole nother piece.
Yeah. So Great Bog and
Yeah.
Jones Avenue and Sagamore Creek and all those.
I'd say, I'd say we have the information in various locations, but probably not quite as easy to access and to identify, because sometimes the rights are complicated. Or a property may be under conservation, but may have certain restrictions in terms of what you can do, and so they don't all look alike. I will say the Pula study, I think, is online.
Okay.
So we do have some of that, and if it would be useful, maybe when we come back at the next meeting, we could kind of bullet point where you can find that information.
Yeah.
Am I correct, Peter, that the Pula study is online?
I-
I
It should be.
think it is.
Yeah, I think it is. Yep.
Because I think I find, when I need it, I
Yeah.
go there.
It's in our list, in the
Yeah.
Plan Portsmouth page, that there's a list of resources, and it's in that list.
But we'll see if we can get a little cheat sheet together with where
Yeah,
those
list of
are.
resources.
Okay.
Because the open space plan, the Pula plan, there's a vernal pool inventory, a wetland inventory, all those things look at open spaces in different ways. So they would be, I think, useful. And one of the things that the Conservation Commission and the city needs is a little bit more stewardship of these lands. So just going out and looking at them once every so often, every year, every other year, whatever the frequency, to make sure there's no issues or concerns or anything we need to address. And then there's opportunities for invasive species studies or habitat enhancement or stormwater treatment or passive recreation, you know. So there's not just passive recreation, there's a lot of other values that can be brought to bear on them.
The city manager, Bohanko, had envisioned what Peter just said as a part-time job. A person who would work for the city, whose total function would be to go from place to place to place among the 91 properties or 94 properties on the Pula study, and do the things that Suzanne's talked about and Peter's talked about, check and make sure the property's not being abused and is available and clearly marked and everything. That'd be a good job for like a part-time retired person.
It could be videoed.
Okay,
Oh my
take the
goodness.
dog.
You might have to do a canoe test.
I love it. I think that there's also another element here, and I think that's probably more Peter Rice's work on parks. We have a lot of parks, and we don't have anyone at the committee level from the city or representing the council or serving to report to the council who is kind of thinking about those, and not just recreation opportunities, but how do we steward the existing parks that we have. And I want to make sure that we do have some kind of stewardship program around those parks, and we're thinking about them beyond, you know, right now we just have a master plan committee for Prescott Park. And so it's almost like we only have a plan for one park, but we need to be thinking about all of our parks and the bigger planning around it. So it's not just conservation land and easements and recreation on those spaces, but recreation as well, and passive recreation even in some of our other park spaces. So,
I would just add that you brought up a really important point when you mentioned the rail trail connection to the Great Bog. That trail that goes through the city is going to create so many opportunities for connections that the timing for something like this seems appropriate to me.
go ahead.
And you raised Prescott Park. You know, as that's evolved, it started really under the control of the trustees of the trust fund, but then it was taken over by the city, and I think it's in much better shape because Peter Rice's people take care of it. But any decisions about programming in the park ultimately are made by the city manager. There's no, in other words, the city manager is responsible for 980 employees and Prescott Park. There's no no committee that weighs the programming as well as the long-term master plan and all that. So
Yeah. I think that that might be helpful, because I think the scope is pretty large. So if we start somewhere with the draft, then maybe we can forward this discussion from there, because when we're looking at language, it's a lot easier to say, oh, wait, we're missing this, and we need to add something else here, so.
And I'll just add at the alternative, sometimes you don't want to add too much language, because there are advantages and disadvantages in terms of what you move to a committee versus what you leave within the city administration as responsible for the maintenance of, and, you know, ultimately as well, the stewardship of the park. So it's finding that balance point. And again, sometimes, as you say, with the language, it can be helpful to see, have we hit that balance point? And, you know, that kind of master planning policy piece, where do we put the priorities? Where do we want to see the evolution of programming go forward without falling into, if you will, having to manage, which falls under a different realm. It's finding that sweet spot, which, yeah.
Right. It's absolutely critical. This should be a visioning committee more than anything. So I think that that's really critical. It's more developing an overarching view of what we can do as a city to preserve green space. Yeah. Okay.
And activate the space we have.
Yeah.
Well, if there are no other comments, I want to thank our guests for joining us today. Truly appreciate you coming and sharing your views. I think it's very helpful to hear from both of you, and we'll continue this discussion. So we're clearly not done yet. It's going to take a while, but thank you.
Thank you.
What I've walked through,
And we're going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is was raised by Councilor Lombardi, the audit committee. So there was a question around the audit committee. Councilor Lombardi, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, I reviewed this book, which was lent to me by John, and I don't know if you have one, but Suzanne said that she has some upstairs, and I think it would be good for all of us to have them. I think one of the things that is very clear in what I've read about the audit committee, and I've read this, and I've read from the New Hampshire, there's an association.
Municipal?
Well, it was the Municipal Association, but there's another thing specifically dealing with this. And then some, also just some broader policies that it's truly the responsibility of the governing body to oversee the audit. And so I guess, and as Suzanne had mentioned to me, you know, those are all guidelines, and that they are, there are reasons to do things not the way the guidelines specifically say. But I guess I want to look at that and carefully think about where we're going with the audit committee. So that's, I know there was issues around some of the processes, but I think that can be resolved too.
Thank you. I asked our city attorney yesterday to come or to share views, and the reason I did that is because when you bring up a topic and you've got 3 people on this committee, well, 2 people and our deputy city manager who advises us here, also sitting on audit committee, I wanted to make sure that our legal counsel would weigh in because clearly the perspective is slightly different if you're sitting on the committee. So I wanted to make sure that we had somebody here who doesn't sit on that committee.
That's correct. We discussed
Our legal
that.
department. Yes.
As Kate said, we discussed that and thought it was perfectly permissible for members who appear in different roles at different times in city government to nonetheless sit here today in this role and debate and deliberate on these questions.
Okay. Good. Counselor Tabor?
I'll share some thoughts on this. I don't think it'll come as a surprise to anyone because it's very, the thoughts I had on the audit committee from July through September of 2021, I think are still the thoughts I have about it. First of all, is there a benefit to having an audit committee? And if there is a benefit, what are the best practices? And if the best practices are different from what we're doing now, how do we as a governance committee take a careful look at that? And shouldn't the best practices be, in effect, the rebuttable presumption? So let me unpack that a little. You know, for best practices, I go to Government Finance Officers Association. They do recommend an audit committee, and they see the benefit as being a practical means for the governing body to provide independent review and oversight. And an audit committee also provides a forum separate from management in which the auditors and other interested parties can candidly discuss concerns. So the audit committee, on behalf of the governing body, you know, chooses the auditor, oversees the audit. But GFOA strongly recommends, and I do think it strongly, that the audit committee be made up only of members of the governing body. And the reason they do that, and they're quite clear about it, is that, first of all, the responsibility for the audit, as they say, belongs to the governing body, and that's true in our city charter, and cannot be delegated. In other words, we as a council are responsible for oversight of management, administration, and we can't delegate that. And second, they say that the members should be made up of only the governing body so that there's no split between the members and the governing body. So if that's the best practice, we now have an audit committee that has 3 members from the citizen volunteers and 2 members from the council. To me, the best practice appears to be that this should be a subcommittee of the city council, 3 city councilors. And I would ask, if that's the best practice, and I'd also point out that no other community in New Hampshire has the setup that we do. If the best practice is to have the audit committee be a subcommittee of the council, isn't that the rebuttable presumption? And I would like to hear the case for doing it the way we're doing it now.
Thank you, Counselor Tabor. I have thought a lot about the structure of the audit committee and what is the most effective means of a committee making the types of decisions that this committee is making and being subject to looking at private information in an RFP process and making recommendations to the council that then the council is asked to act upon. And it's a responsibility that is truly a council responsibility first and foremost. So the financials of the organization are one of the number one responsibilities of the council, and overseeing the city manager is the other responsibility of the council. Those are the two primary functions of the city council. And it seems to me unusual that you would dictate a primary function of your governing body to any other body that does not have a majority membership of your governing body. And that generally, when you're making decisions as a governing body, decisions that are the responsibility primarily of the governing body, that those decisions would be made and recommendations would come from members of that governing body. I think the GFOA guidelines are completely sensible. And I think that we witnessed how an audit committee can work and recommendations that come before the council and how the council works with the audit committee this last fall. And to be honest, I don't think that it was very effective the way that it's currently set up. I think there are challenges around issuing RFPs and having citizens review those without having oaths of office that require them not to disclose information that's in the RFP publicly. I think that that is a challenge. I think that's why the RFP process has been left to the city management to review, to issue RFPs, review RFPs, make decisions around RFPs, because the RFP process is supposed to be completely independent. And city councilors are in a different role because they do have an oath of office, and would be reasonable, it would be a reasonable assumption that a city councilor would then have the authority to review those RFPs and make a recommendation to the council. So I can see where the GFOA guidelines are coming from my personal experience. And I think that the guidelines are completely reasonable. I, like Councilor Tabor, would tend to believe that an audit committee should be made up of 3 city councilors making recommendations to the governing body. And I do think it's important to keep an audit committee in place. I think it's important that we have that additional check and that city councils are mindful of this process and the need to select an unbiased auditor. I think that's absolutely critical. So that's where I stand on it as well. So, Councilor Lombardi?
I didn't say it as directly as either of you did, but I agree completely that it is the because the financials, because the overall financial health of the city belongs to the city council. I would agree that the audit committee should be made up of city councilors.
Councilor Tabor?
And one of the other recommendations from GFOA is that the audit committee as a subcommittee of the governing body, have advice, or perhaps include an expert, but that expert, it's interesting what they recommend, somebody who has experience in municipal finance, is independent, and has actually been through auditing processes on either side. Because, you know, as elected representatives, we would need that expertise.
I have a question around that. I would like to hear viewpoints on that because I personally believe that that is something that a committee can call in expertise in the same way that the governance committee has called in our recreation director this morning to talk about recreation opportunities. Because I would not by any means say that I'm an expert on recreation, and I would also not say that I am an expert in municipal finance as well. So would it be reasonable to say that you could set up a committee of 3 city councilors and then bring in outside expertise as needed when there are questions?
And I think the answer to that is yes, in the sense that, you know, the city council, you know, has the authority to ask the city manager to reach out and bring in an expert. Certainly, you know, money can be typically found in the budget, you know, and whether to put a specific line item in the budget in case, you know, some outside assistance would be required. I know certainly, you know, in the legal department, we have a professional services line item for engaging outside legal counsel. I'm sure we could find a place, and typically there is sufficient money. There's certainly organizations within, you know, New England that help place, you know, they have access to retired municipal employees who are willing to consult and work part-time and handle small projects, and it ranges from public works to finance to welfare to library. So I think should the need arise, there is the ability to find and retain someone who is not associated with the city of Portsmouth in any way, who could support the city council should the need arise.
Councilor Lombardi.
Yeah, I would add that one of the issues is that in an audit, I don't think you want to bare your books to the general public. And by having the council who have basically have the responsibility and have signed an oath of office that can limit that. I think that anyone brought in from the outside could also be asked to sign a confidentiality agreement as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilor Lombardi. I agree it's important to have confidentiality agreements around
Yeah.
looking at anything that's internal. You know, this is one of those, if something were ever found in an audit, like misappropriation of funds that impacted an employee, that's the kind of information that you wouldn't want disclosed publicly due to contracts that we have, union contracts, in ways that we have prescribed legal agreements with how things like that are set. So I agree, confidentiality is absolutely critical. Fortunately, as a city, we are not in that position. We've had very good reviews in the past for our financial record keeping and for our controls. So I think we're in a good place to start and to make sure we get this right. I think it was very good that the last council identified the need for somebody to review the audit. I think that that's really an important function. So, does anyone else have anything to add? If not, I was going to ask our city attorney, instead of our deputy city attorney, if he would mind assisting us in providing some language in the context of the current ordinance, in ways that we could change it to reflect, I think, a general idea of switching to 3 counselors. And then we will review it again.
Why don't I produce a proposed draft ordinance for you to look at?
Thank you. And then we can revisit this topic again at our next meeting. I think there's going to be a lot of public interest around it. So I think it's really important that we have adequate time to address it. And I think it's always helpful when people can look at the ordinance and the language. Because we are so limited for time today, I'm going to move on to our next topic, the committee rotation schedule. You have a packet in front of you from the city clerk of all the appointments for every committee and term or board, and we are not going to go through this today. I gave it to you informationally because the city clerk could not join us. So I'm going to wait until the city clerk can join us to go through this. But this should help us look at terms. We talked about the possibility to see if it was even possible to track back terms so that we could adequately rebalance our committees to reflect the ordinances that were written and rotations, healthy rotation of committees. So this is kind of a starting point for you to review. That's all that you're getting today. I don't think we need to go through it unless anyone has any questions about our future discussion. Okay. With that, the next item is the mid-year council report. You received in your packet, and this was posted online as well, a report, potential report to the council at the July 11th meeting, the mid-year update from governance. I don't know if I can, I'm going to try to.
If not, I think I have it on the flash drive. That's what you're looking for.
If you have it, it might be good to share it so the people in the room, if they didn't look at the packet, have an opportunity to actually see it. It's a very basic report of where we are and what we're doing. Just the work accomplished so far. First, let's see if we can pull it up. I want to try to leave.
CC presentation.
Okay. There. So, Governance Committee mid-year update. You're going to laugh. I used this slide because it has a floor in it. And to me, the Governance Committee should be the floor, the foundation for making sure things work appropriately.
Nice slide.
So the next one is the work that we've accomplished so far.
It's only 4 slides.
I don't know if you've had a chance to review. We reviewed the city council rules, made recommendations to the council for adoption. Those changes were adopted, specifically looking at 43B on the public dialogue process and Rule 41 addressed by the public, which we said to leave alone, and we codified the practice of friendly amendments. We reviewed the ethics ordinance and revised that ordinance and made recommendations to the council. As you all know, second reading is coming up at the next meeting of the council. And we worked with 4 former mayors to review the proposal by Councilor Denton to change the city charter to elect councilors by ward. We did not take any action on that. We've just reviewed it. So I didn't include any action there. The ongoing work, we reviewed the ordinance for defunct boards, commissions, and committees with recommendations forthcoming to the council, I believe, because we're finished with that process on ordinances to sunset. And we reviewed the administrative ordinance chapter 1, articles 3 through 4, for recommended changes to board, commissions, and committee structure. And we're currently in that process. So that's what we're reviewing in that process. And sections 3 through 4 are really boards, commissions, committees. That's what those are. And we're also reviewing those sections and the terms to bring them in line with the rotation envisioned in the RSAs and the ordinances. So that will come up at the next meeting. And future tasks of the committee, reviewing policies for the city for revisions and additions, including but not limited to the sidewalk policy, which we were just tasked with, public arts policies, potential donation policy, making recommendations to the council around public engagement, and specifically the community campus process. That was the request, and completing a further review of council practice and making recommendations on areas of improvement. You know, one of those things could be like the conflict of interest policies that we didn't look at as part of the ethics review, coming back to conflict of interest across all the different rules and ordinances. Does anyone have any questions, or I want thoughts, and I want to know if there are any recommended changes before we move forward.
One item in our to-do list, I don't know whether we wanted to include it in the slides or not, is when appointments are made between election and inauguration.
Okay.
You know, how do we standardize that? Is what we're doing now what we want to continue to do?
Okay. And that is an oversight on my part. I can add
I
that.
don't think the council asked us to look at that, though.
No,
But I
but
can't remember.
I think it's a reasonable thing to do when we're looking at terms, balancing terms as well,
Right.
to make sure that that makes sense because of the differing rotation schedule. I can add that.
But I know we've discussed it as a group here.
Is there anything else?
Nope.
Is everyone happy with the format?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's succinct, which is always good.
Yeah.
Simple. With that said, with the addition, can I get a motion to present this to the council at the next meeting with that addition?
So move.
Second?
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So we will move forward with that. Our next item is public comment. We are very limited for time today. I want to note first, for all those that are here for public comment, that everything we're discussing today is coming back at our next meeting on July 11th, and we didn't make decisions on anything today beyond the report to the council. So there's plenty of time for more public comment. I don't anticipate decisions quickly.
May I just be excused to check out what's going on here?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We only have about 5 more minutes. So I'm going to ask anyone who comes forward for public comment to please speak for, try to limit your comments to about a minute, noting that you can come back on July 11th for more public comment. All right.
Pedro Huda, 280 South Street. So in listening to your review, specifically about the audit committee, I find it interesting that nobody was invited, like the audit chair or former audit chairs, to address the issues. I would like to clarify some of the issues that were brought forward. The first thing would be when you're discussing putting 3 counselors on here, the reason why the counselors were not put on here, Counselor Tabor, and I'll pull from Forrest Gump, because future councils with financial experience were not anticipated, or as Forrest would say, future councils are like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. So in anticipation of that, that is the reason we brought people in and requested this in the beginning, to bring people in with financial experience. And yes, Councillor Cook, they do take an oath. I think that needs to be looked up. The next thing that you should know is that the most important thing here is that we have an independence and expertise in knowing what you're looking at. And it seems you're going around that. And I was so glad to hear, finally, Council Lombardi, that you got up to date on what an audit is and what it's performed, because in watching the meeting, financial wasn't even addressed. And the other thing, City Attorney, that I found was very telling is you call this a political issue. This is actually one of the most important things that the City Council does, is guarantee that the city staff is performing in compliance with state statutes and laws. So that was kind of telling in the discussion. But actually going back here, since you now have the documentation, I would call your attention to the executive summary on page XI, where it tells you what the descriptions of who is to perform it and how it is independent, because that is the most important thing here. The process that took place last year was not independent. It was controlled by the staff. It was taken over by the staff. And if you look at the past meetings, you will see that that occurred over time. And in the end, the job of the audit committee was not even performed. As no recommendation was made by the audit committee, it was made by a counselor. So, since I only have a minute, and I will be back, I just wanted to clarify those points so you can consider that. The most important thing is having financial expertise on this committee, because we have no idea going forward into 10 councils ahead of this what the makeup of the councils are going to be. And it will go back the same as it did now. If there's 3 counselors on here without any financial expertise or experience in this, to the staff, and it will be like it is now, not independent. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Again, can we limit our comments to a minute?
I will be brief. Sue Polidora, 45 Middle. And I just want to convey that the audit committee issue was the issue that got me from my EC chair to the city council and to this meeting. And it is because I saw the need to have something different that we have been doing. It was shocking to me that we had one company for almost 30 years and that we considered to have independents be people within the same agency doing the audit, or different people within the same agency. If there is any kind of issue, you will never find it that way, because they are not going to jeopardize the company in order to do that. But what I heard it being suggested is that we can just bring in other people to give advice. You have 3 very qualified people right now giving you advice for free. And it's almost like they are not wanted, they are rejected. I mean, these are they did accounting at a very deep level. I don't see that expertise in the city council right now, and I'm not sure that I will see it in the future. That you can sit in there and open the books and understand what it is that you're reading. So I'm saying you need to use this committee that was formed and is under ordinance to the best advantage, rather than trying to kick him out and replace him with something else. Remember, you are the governing body, so your commitment should be to make this decision aside of the people in the town. So would you be able to make this decision just among yourselves without getting anybody within the city involved? If you don't have that expertise, this is what these people came here to do, to give you that. The other thing is that in the last meeting, I'll wrap up, city attorney said that people come in guns a-blazing if we decided to do something with the audit committee. And I'm going to say, yeah, he was right. You should listen to him, because there will be people that will be very upset about it and will be vocal, and I'm one of them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Liza Hewitt, 726 Middle Road. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Lombardi mentioned sunsetting the audit committee at the meeting. I watched it on Channel 22. The attorney and committee members had a real good laugh and made some very inappropriate comments about the public coming out with guns blazing. That was about a week after Uvalde and the children being shot up. I find that very offensive. I find it disrespectful to residents that that's what you would say, that our public comments would be quoted that way. Fast forward now, we're 2 weeks later, and you spent 20 minutes discussing why all the residents should be removed from the audit committee and replaced with 3 counselors, and gave Mr. Sullivan the job of, I think I heard, drafting a rewrite of the audit committee after 20 minutes of discussion by this committee. I find that appalling, and you really need to do a better job. This push, fast through, get it done, take the residents off, don't listen to their comments. It's no good. It's no good. It's no good for Portsmouth. It's disrespectful to residents, and you really need to do a better job with that. Thank you.
Well, I guess I have to say good afternoon. I want to thank all of you for your time. I just want to, there were some reference materials that were referred here. Could you please specify what they were? Sometimes acronyms, people don't know them. So, for instance, GFOA, was that one of the? Yeah, if you could just clarify what those were. And I think you had a booklet as well.
Yeah, it's a publication of the General Finance Officers Association.
General Finance?
Government finance.
Government finance.
Yes.
Okay.
Government, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. No, I think it's helpful so that people can kind of like know, which reference materials are being used.
It's
and they
available
can.
online.
Yeah, I so appreciate it. Briefly echo some concerns, but as you were displaying the slide deck, right? I still feel there is a huge disconnect on this being governance and people not being here. People is like a second thought, a thought thereafter. They're not on the table, they're not discussing. So it's not coming from the people, right? So some people, I'm not I don't want you to think that I am putting as a second thought what you have seen, your perceptions. No, because like yourselves, there is an entire community. But governance means how we are governed, how we want to be governed. And I think I've said this before during the council, and I want to say this again. It belongs to the people. And I see, for instance, who are the 4 mayors invited to discuss, I think was ethics? Who were the 4 mayors? Councilor Cook?
They were our 4 most recent former mayors.
Yeah. So do we know the list, or probably they were?
It would be in the minutes.
It's in the minutes, so, yes.
All right, okay.
And just so we have it on the record, your name.
Oh, I'm
just so we
sorry,
have it.
I'm sorry.
I know who you are. but-
No, I know, I'm sorry. I was concerned with the time. It's Alita Morgan, Richards Avenue. So I'm really concerned. You put the floor over there, because this committee is the ground. People should be the ground. This is us. This is not you guys only. I mean, I appreciate your time. I think I appreciate you bringing thoughts, but I think your thoughts are really have to come and discuss with a lot more people. And I will bring again, having a meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning just doesn't it doesn't facilitate, it doesn't encourage anyone to really come and talk. So if you're really willing to listen from the people on initiatives you are bringing or issues you are concerned with, and if you really care about that input and really get a collection of inputs and not like on the time, once it gets at the council, you're setting things in motion. You have this many, first reading, second reading, blah, 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 and that's it. But this is important. I know I am a little bit, but I think this is at the core, to me, of what your committee should be. I want to remind you of that. It is about a community, not a few people who are privileged to come here at 10 o'clock in the morning to talk about our lives as residents in a civic fashion. I really, really, really think you have to revisit this. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate the work you're doing, and have a great holiday. Thank you.
May I speak one more thing?
Let me make sure I don't have anyone else on Zoom first. Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to speak?
Mr. Duffy's on Zoom. I don't know if you...
Hi, Fiona. Thanks for letting me in. I will actually save my comments for the next meeting. I'm cognizant of your time constraints, so that's absolutely fine with me.
Thank you.
Peter Huda, 288 South Street. My one question is, in your draft here, I would ask you to look at section 1303, Planning Board, number 2. This section here is in conflict with RSA 673-2 of who appoints people to the Planning Board. If you are governance, then this needs to be fixed right away. And as Bob would tell you, or Suzanne, state RSA trumps city ordinances. And personally, I would like to see that corrected. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment?
I just have one little.
Microphone.
My name's Claire Kittredge, and I'm a resident of Franklin Street. And I just have, because I haven't followed this as closely as needs to be done, I would like to express a hope that this rotation business about the members of the boards, particularly the land use boards, is not a veiled effort to facilitate the removal of people who the city and the people the city appears to be pleasing, or to facilitate that. And anyway, time will tell, but this is the time to get really straight about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to close public comment. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm sorry for the tight schedule. I actually have to pick my child up at camp at 12:30 out of town. So other business, the items under other business are items that are coming up to the committee. So I just put them there so that they're placeholders, so we're aware that they're coming. A public arts ordinance, public art review committee that I've actually been working on, drafting something around that. We discussed at the last committee, Historical Archive Blue Ribbon Committee. I was hoping somebody here today would be willing to prepare something for the council to set that up, if somebody's interested.
Yeah,
All right, thank you. And we have to review the sidewalk policy, as the council tasked us with at their last meeting. Review and establish a donations policy, as we were also tasked with at the last meeting. Recommend a community campus process as well. Is there any other business, and I should note that, Councilor Tabor, your concern around appointments in the time space between elections and sitting of any new elected body, I've considered that as part of the committee rotation schedule discussion.
Okay.
So that's where I have that. Is there anything else?
I could talk with staff about community campus process, maybe bring some ideas.
Yeah,
Great.
why don't you touch base with me, and then we'll figure out the team, because we have been, thanks to Beverly's work in the planning department, we're getting a little better at doing public information plans, like literally laying out the whole scheme of how we would like to get public information. And so I think we're learning from what she's bringing from her other work and trying to leverage that. So
Yeah.
connect
Yeah.
on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Tabor. I think that dovetails well with your concerns about making sure we gather good information.
From the public.
Yes. Is there anything else that
No.
we should cover?
We'll do this one with these guys,
Okay.
whoever bites.
I'll talk to you.
With that note, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.